You're listening to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Here, you'll find discussions around recruiting trends and best practices with talent acquisition leaders in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries so that you and your team are informed and up to date in an ever-evolving space. And now, here's your host, Chris Tamburini.
All right, Liz Molano, welcome to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very happy to have you on. So let's just dive right into it. Obviously, you and I have known each other for quite some time, but I don't think we ever talked about how you got into recruiting in the first place. So I think the listeners and I would be curious to kind of learn about it.
Yeah. Well, I, like anyone in recruiting, I studied for this my whole life, and it was my long-term plan from the moment I went to college. No.
That's hilarious.
No, I fell into it like most people do. When I graduated, had a degree in biology, I knew that I didn't want to continue doing research, and I wasn't pre-med, and I really kind of struggled with what I wanted to do moving forward. And I did fall into recruiting. And my first job was, as you know, with the Bowden Group, which is a boutique recruiting firm here in Boston. And their business is, much larger now, but they were really focused on life sciences. That was their bread and butter. So it was an interesting way for me to take at least a biology background and apply it to something. And I loved talking to people about the industry. It's interesting when you graduate with a degree in science, you have no idea what it means to actually go out there and be in biotech. So I learned quite a bit about what it actually takes to not just do some research, in the lab in a college setting, but what it actually takes to get a drug from the discovery process through development and all the way into the hands of a patient. So I was with the Bowden Group recruiting for a handful of years. That was the beginning of it all.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about that, I do remember, and you and I share that in common. So I actually, like you, went to school for biochem and biology and decided I did not want to do that for a living in a lab. Did you ever work in a lab at all? Did that made you decide, okay, I don't want to do this? Or did you just decide, I want to go into business?
I never worked in a lab after college. Obviously, as a bio major, I was doing my thesis, and then I was working on campus for a couple of summers in various labs. So I had that experience, right? But it was, I would say, much more rudimentary than an actual industry setting.
Yeah, pretty much the same experience I had. I worked in a lab, did like an independent study, and I was like, this is really interesting, but I don't want to do it. And then isn't it crazy how much you learn about drug development and life sciences and biotech after you leave school? Like you were saying, like as a recruiter, you learned so much about the industry that you had zero. Like when you graduate, you feel like you know a lot about life sciences and biology and chemistry. And then you realize you know very, very little once you hit industry.
Well, that's right. And the research you're doing in that setting, in undergrad in particular, is so narrowly focused. And the goal of it isn't obviously drug development. So it really opens up a whole other world of processes and considerations that you really just didn't know about. So it's very cool.
Yeah, no, cool. So, you said you fell into it. Was it just kind of like someone had approached you about a job opportunity, or was it more so like you heard about recruiting and you started applying for recruiting jobs? I'm curious how you actually fell into it.
Chris, you're really pushing me to go far back now. I think that I had been job searching. Graduating in 2009 was a tough year.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us graduated without a job secured. So I was actively searching. I do remember seeing a posting for this role that was specifically looking for someone who had some sort of life sciences type of experience. And it wasn't, I think, a requirement, but it was geared toward someone who maybe had studied biology or a similar science field in college. And I thought, okay, well, all is not lost. I can do that. I may not know what I'm doing, but I know a bit about science and I can learn.
Yeah, I know exactly the feeling you're talking about. You and I have a almost identical path on our voyage into recruiting. And so, I think, in your position, Liz, you're overseeing the growth of an organization. And you've had experiences both on the agency side, and then you made a transition onto the corporate side. And so you've seen different markets. You mentioned 2009, which was, you know, right around the time I started, which was a really difficult market. And I don't even think you and I probably didn't even realize it at the time because it was the only thing we knew. But looking back at it and comparing it to some more recent times, you can say, wow, that was a pretty challenging time. And so I'm kind of curious on your take on this current market, where we stand here in 2023, kind of comparing that to some of the things that you've seen in the past. So what's your overall take on the biotech hiring market right now when you're trying to grow an organization and trying to grow a company?
Well, it is really an anomaly some ways. We've seen a whole variety of markets, Chris, and you've seen this too in biotech. Over the last 10 years or so, things have changed so significantly. And there are many, many more smaller biotech companies now than there ever were. So things have really shifted away from some of the larger pharma companies who, in fairness, still have a very large presence. But there's been a significant amount of kind of onesie, twosie biotech companies, a significant amount of innovation. What's interesting now is someone put this very astutely recently to me. They said, "Gosh, heading into 2022, biotech was in abundance." And it was such a good way of describing the market. Again, so many companies, a significant number of drug product candidates in development, right? These
Mm-hmm.
huge pipelines, many candidates in terms of actual people. And a lot of these companies were frankly a bit bloated. And we saw this in tech too, that with the abundance of innovation and these, really bulging pipelines, companies had to hire, and they hired perhaps more than they otherwise, would have in a down market. And I think the result of that is a little bit unfortunate. I mean, there are certainly some great stories of buy-ups by larger pharma companies who have been able to keep certain technologies afloat and continue those on. But there have also been really difficult stories of layoffs, like we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's continued, as you know, into 2023. This is pretty unprecedented. So there are many, many qualified candidates out there. There are resume books left and right. So yes, in terms of the market, there is more of an abundance of candidates. I would say the other kind of piece of that is, what are candidates looking for, which has also shifted quite a bit, even since you and I got a start. And candidates today are significantly more invested in the social aspect of the place that they're working. They value things like flexibility and autonomy. They value a focus on DE&I, whatever that means to them. They value the ability to learn and develop, and see clear opportunities for upward mobility. They value transparency across all levels of the organization. So we've needed to shift the way that we are not only presenting ourselves to the world, but the way that we're interviewing candidates and what we're looking for. I think in biotech, it's very easy to focus your search on a certain set of skills. And to me, that is a baseline threshold, right? If you meet a certain criteria and you have the ability to complete certain tasks, that's one thing. But your success in a role is going to be determined by not only that, but everything else that you bring to the table, and the fits that you are within the culture, your willingness to embrace, who we are today and help drive us to who we'll be tomorrow. So again, I think, again, I'm sure you've seen this, but people are just looking for such different things now than they ever have been.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a lot of good points. There was a lot right there, what you just said, Liz. And
Great. Are we done?
yeah, we're done. All right. We'll see you next time. That concludes today's recording. No, but I think you touched on a couple things. So there's one thing that you mentioned, and I'm curious on your thoughts. And so clearly the expectations of candidates have shifted. And I personally and ultimately think it's a natural evolution in humanity, right? You expect things to become better and better as time goes on in the long run. And that also relates to the workplace. And when you look at workplace culture and expectations and where they were probably 10 to 15 years ago versus where they are now, you're right. They're drastically different. And I think it's for the better. However, and you might have some opinions on this, do you think some of those expectations, whether they're cultural expectations or amenities or salaries or titles, do you think there might be a level of inflation or over expectation from the candidate perspective from time to time? And do you think what we're seeing now in the market is maybe kind of a step back and letting everyone kind of reevaluate a different set or a more realistic set of expectations?
It's a great question, Chris. I think much of that is industry dependent. In my experience in biotech, especially in this market, in a small, growing company, the one area I see where expectations are inflated the most is title and
Yeah.
sometimes salary. Um, Anyone can always go somewhere else down the street and lobby for and probably get a higher title and perhaps more money. But even then, that's not something that is, across the board. I think that for the most part, people are reasonable. And when you engage in a good recruiting process and you have built that candidate trust and you have a good candidate experience, you can set expectations that are realistic and reasonable. And by the time you've gone through the interview process and shown them how wonderful this opportunity is in terms of the culture, in terms of the technology, um, in terms of, for us at Orna, how I think uniquely situated we are to be, a thriving and growing company in this difficult market, um, then we're able to have again a better level setting conversation. I think sometimes there is a perception that, people are looking for all of the other kind of amenities, the free food, the on-site massages, the this, the that. We did a survey of all of our employees last year, and we got fantastic feedback on our existing benefits and how they were serving our population, and asked what more are people looking for. And that was so helpful to hear how people felt like they were actually benefiting from our total rewards offerings, both now, but also what they felt we could add that would be valuable to them. And that was really important so that we didn't just go out and think of something that we thought, oh, other companies are doing this, why not do it here? And those are the things that have really made a difference. And so to your question, do I see a lot of unrealistic or unreasonable expectations? Not a ton. And I think people are understanding that we are a smaller company. We are, I hate to call us startup because that indicates a whole level of chaos that we do not have and are trying to get away from. But we are an earlier phase company. And I
Yeah.
think people have realistic expectations. And on top of that, when they see the investment we've made in our total rewards strategy and just other perks, that's the icing on the cake.
Yeah, that's well. First off, it's good to hear your perspective, and I think it seems to make a lot of sense. I'm curious before I kind of dive into something that you talked about, which is kind of being fast growing and trying to manage chaos. But you did mention something along the lines of taking a survey and getting expectations from your candidate base or your employee base. I'm curious what some of those findings were, like off the top of your head. Like, do you remember specifically what were some things that stood out that maybe you were surprised about, or maybe you were satisfied to get validation on?
Well, again, it was on, our benefits offerings, which covered things like our actual medical and dental benefits, access to mental health resources, et cetera. So we got great feedback overall, that people felt like at a baseline we were doing really well, and that generally speaking their needs were being met in terms of medical coverage. We heard some great feedback on wanting more mental health support, and the feedback was varied. Some of it was, yeah, more time off would be great, but other feedback was, I don't really know where to go. If I want to talk to someone, if I want do it on my own resource, where do I look? How do I find, someone who's in network? How do I even know if I click with a provider? So we implemented Ginger, which is a fantastic mental health platform providing everything from, again, on-demand self-guided resources to talk therapy, to, psychologist access. We heard from people that a 401k match was like the number one thing that was missing. And we knew that going into it. Before we put the survey out, that had been something that I was committed to bringing to our executive team and our board. But to hear that resonate across the survey was very, very important. So yeah, it was helpful to hear the things that would be actually impactful to people. And Chris, it wasn't like these random, untenable perks.
Yeah.
It was pretty reasonable.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It is good to hear because the last couple of years may have been a little froth in the market as far as expectations go, but it is good to hear from your point and where we're at currently in the market that the expectations were realistic. And I think, yeah, things like 401k matches and mental health support is not really asking a lot. I do like the fact, and I think it's kind of interesting that the mental health piece was such a big finding. And I think it's something that we could probably have a whole other podcast on this that has become more and more prevalent over the last probably 5 to 10 years about how important that is to people and how much it's been overlooked for really decades in the workplace.
It has been, and it is a fine line, Chris, right? To be an employer and at the same time, supporting someone's mental health in the workplace. And by the way, mental health outside of the workplace always bleeds in, right? There's
Yeah.
not necessarily a clean line in terms of where that begins and ends, or where that shows up and how someone experiences it based on where they are. So it can be a fine line, again, as an employer managing our own risk, managing how much or how little, we want to be involved. And there is a line. At some
Yeah.
point, we can support an employee only so far. But again, providing them access to resources, doing things like defining what a flexible work environment looks like and giving people the autonomy to come and go as it works for their role in their team, treating them like adults. We're building a new place in Watertown, which we're so excited about. And we had this whole debate on seating, right? Do we keep a cube system? Do we go totally open seating? Is it somewhere in between? People felt very, very strongly that they love being in the office. They want to come into the office and be around one another, and they want their space. It's very important to them to feel like they have that personal space when they're there. And so for us, the complete open seating arrangement wasn't an option, and people really enjoy that. I know we're kind of talking about perks and benefits, and that may not be the first thing you think of, but
No.
the office environment that you create, and supporting the way your employees work and what they actually want is so important. So yeah, there's a myriad things that
Yeah.
employers can do that aren't, I think, crossing that line or a boundary, but are really accommodating, what employees feel is important to them. And again, that degree of autonomy that everyone has developed, especially over COVID.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that. And I'm curious on what your take is and what the future state is from your perspective on the work from home versus on site kind of policy or culture at your company. It sounds like there's an appetite to be together. And I've heard varying things from varying companies, from varying skill sets within these companies. But what is kind of your take on the future of that? Sounds like you guys are building out space specifically to collaborate more together. Are you guys leaning towards a hybrid model? Is it going to be more of an open model? I'm curious.
Yeah, look, I can't speak across the board. Everyone will manage this very differently. Every individual's work styles are so different based on not only personal preference, but what their role is, right? For someone who is, doing data analytics all day, it may not make sense for them to be in the office every single day. So I can speak to Orna, however, and what we have found and heard from employees is that, again, they do like coming on site. They really appreciate the ability to come and go. For some of our scientists, that may mean they are on site in the lab when they need to be. But if the rest of their day is spent writing SOPs and doing documentation, they have the ability to do that from home in some cases. We have heard that people are so anxious to get all of us back under one roof together because we haven't been for a while as we've been building out this new space. People are very excited to come together for lunch, for various, company-wide events. The ease of having a conversation with a colleague that's near you, that's lost when you are in a fully remote environment. That is something that's missed. I think working together, and not just being collaborative, but getting things done and having some of the continuity of in office conversations, is really missed. Again, we don't want to force anyone to be coming in every single day. That's not the way of the world now. I love that too. I'm in the office a couple of days a week, home a few days, and I've come to appreciate that flexibility as well. So for Orna, we're very fortunate that we have a culture and environment where people are very excited to be with one another on site and come into the office. And likewise, they appreciate the ability to, again, come and go, as it works for their role and their team.
I love it. I feel like that's really the direction that most companies are heading that have really done their research. And it sounds like you guys have. And, it's tough because there is something to be said about collaboration and camaraderie that happens in person versus over Zoom or over the phone or over email. And as long as, in my opinion, as long as you're not totally missing out on that in-person interaction, then I think it's beneficial. And I think providing people the autonomy and the freedom to be productive and to be collaborative on their own kind of schedule, if you will, seems like it's going to create the most productive, happiest environment. But time will tell. We're still learning about kind of what the ideal situation is.
We are. We have a hunch. This is what we've heard. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. So this is all really related to, I think, growing a company in this current market, in this current period of time. And so Orna, as you mentioned, you're not a startup, but you're not a large company. You're a growing company and you're a fast growing company. And earlier you mentioned, okay, in a startup company, that term indicates chaos, but I think it's up to individuals like yourself as a head of people and who are overseeing talent acquisition to kind of manage that chaos. So how do you navigate that? How do you navigate that vast array of things coming at you? I imagine it's going to be really dynamic and really challenging, and it's probably up to you to kind of keep things out of a chaotic state. So what's your take on that? How do you manage that in your position?
Yeah, well, it's partly me, but all of leadership plays a very important role. And I think first and foremost, the best thing that we can do as leaders is have some foresight. All of us here have been at much larger companies, and we've experienced rapid growth, or we've been at larger companies and global leadership positions, and so we've seen what the next phase can look like. So we have to always be thinking a handful of steps ahead. So not only are you anticipating what's coming, but that also gives you the clarity to decide what is important right now. Are there operational infrastructure pieces that must be in place that will help you scale? Um, are there things that you can let fall by the wayside for now? So, first, again, I think it's really being clear on what infrastructure you need to have, because if you don't do it now, you'll have to do it later, and it's going to be very, very painful to do it at a larger scale. I think, second of all, it's deciding how you want your people to grow with you. For Orna, that has meant, even before I joined, having a culture of transparency. And that's hard. Not everything can always be shared all of the time. And it's also something you have to really work hard to cultivate. You have to be very intentional about creating and fostering a culture of transparency, because people come to expect that they will know a lot. But we do trust our employees with, I think, a lot more information than many other companies share. And our hope is, and what we've seen, is that if people feel like they understand why decisions are being made, decisions at the corporate level, decisions about our portfolio, our programs, you know, that helps them trust. It helps them really understand how their work is tied to the greater picture, the value of what they're doing on a day to day. So it's not perfect, Chris. I'm sure there are plenty of people at Orna who would say, gosh, I'm not sure why I'm doing this experiment over here, or I'm not sure what the purpose of this project is. But creating an environment where you can also ask those questions and get that clarity is very, very important. So I think the third piece is, again, coming together as a leadership team and being intentional about the flow of information and how governance is structured within an organization. If you do not take the time to set good governance structures early on, if an executive team or an extended leadership team is not clear with themselves on who's on first and how decisions are being made, your people will feel that very, very strongly. That will trickle.
Yeah,
Um, so I feel very strongly that it starts with leadership modeling that.
I like that. That's great insight. Um, and from a it just sounds responsible, right? It's I think it's easy to let things get out of control as you're growing, but I think if you're intentional, like you said, about providing some structure and aligning with other leadership and making it a clear goal of yours to structure things and mitigate chaos, then makes sense.
And you just can't do it all. You just cannot have an expectation that you're going to do it all right now. I think sometimes for people, I see this with us sometimes, for those of us who have been at larger companies, there's almost this feeling, oh my gosh, we're not doing enough. We're not there yet. We don't have this thing in place. We're so behind. Um, Maybe in some cases. But I think part of that is just an angst that is associated with, again, having been in a different place, and recognizing what's appropriate for
Yeah.
our size right now. And again, what do we need to do now in anticipation of pain that we want to avoid downstream?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I feel like in business that happens a lot. I mean, what you just said kind of resonated with me, where you have all these ideas in mind, you want all these structures to be in place so that you can execute cleanly within them, and you want everything to be templatized to a degree where you can just move seamlessly in all these different directions. You have all these nice processes and things are in place. But in reality, it takes time, right? It takes time, especially as you're evolving and growing. But having that foresight, I think, is beneficial. And I think that's not. I think it's anything in business, and a lot of different applications to that. Cool. All right. You know, I guess let's switch gears here for a minute and kind of get into recruiting a little bit. And so I know that your background started in recruiting, as we talked about earlier, and you've kind of transitioned into HR business partner and head of people, and that's come with some different responsibilities. But when it comes down to tactical recruiting and looking at the size of your company, from what I understand, your particular strategy was to implement an RPO model. And then as the company built more infrastructure, take that RPO model and transition it to an internal model, which interestingly enough is almost opposite of what other companies do. Some companies will go internal and then they'll transition to an RPO model. It sounds as though maybe you and your team, Liz, have done the opposite. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that and kind of what the thought process and reasoning and logic was behind all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, RPOs are meant to augment. They can be used in, as you said, both of those scenarios. We used ours an RPO model much earlier on. I think other companies get a certain way with internal resources themselves, but then, for example, they may have a hiring spree that they really need to be managed, and so there's a finite kind of augmentation, or they have an internal resource, but they're not ready to fully build out that function even more internally. For us, there was a very purposeful utilization of an RPO earlier on. So when I joined Orna, we're about 125 today. When I joined, we were about 40. And the hiring strategy was just like a free for all. It was, it was like the Oprah model. Like, you get an agency recruiter and you get an agency recruiter. And I'm like, who are these people? And how are you hiring managers working with them? But that's fine. I think it's very normal for a lot of companies that
Yeah.
are pretty early on. But I've had the prior experience to know that that was not scalable. And part of that experience, Chris, came from doing an RPO, being involved in an RPO at a very early stage company while I was with the Bowden Group. And that was at Tesaro, which was about 30 people when I joined. People may know their drug Zejula right now, and they've long since been acquired by GSK. But it was the same idea of a high growth company, and engaging with an RPO was not only a way to think a lot more strategically and enhance kind of the tactics of recruiting, but it was a better way to manage the process, and it was significantly faster than going out and hiring an internal resource. So with an RPO, the beauty of that, as you know, is you're partnered with a team of recruiters who have support behind them. So it's scheduling, it's project tracking, it's a whole client service model behind the recruiters. So I think that was a very good success for us. We partnered with the Bowden Group. Gosh, we've hired most of our organization at this point in partnership with the Bowden Group.
Yeah.
So, yeah, part of it was for me coming on board thinking, okay, I'm not going to be able to manage all of this activity,
Yeah.
nor do I want to. And how do we get trusted people in here quickly to kind of wrangle the process and make the employee experience better, make the candidate experience better, more streamlined, more consistent, etc.
And so, if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like you may be switching into a mode where the RPO has really helped that rapid growth. And now you're at a stage where that rapid growth might not be as necessary. And you might be shifting into an internal model. Is that accurate? And then I guess it sounds like maybe you've taken things from what that RPO has given you and maybe made them part of the fabric of the internal process. Is that on point, or am I just going off on a tangent there?
Yeah, you're so wrong. No.
Okay. Wouldn't be the first time.
Nice try. No. No, you're right, Chris. I mean, I think first of all, what was it, or how did I know that it was time to hire internally? And I think I knew that um, because we were going to continue growing. I knew that because we had done so much with the RPO. But there, at the end of the day, no matter how ingrained they are still not Orna employees. And I think that people and hiring managers have grown a lot even through the RPO engagement, and they're ready for an internal subject matter expert, for
Yeah.
someone to really come on and be the face of talent acquisition, not only from the recruiting process, but getting some metrics and analytics in place that we can be better about tracking, to understand trends in not just our employee population, but hiring. Someone who can really devote more time to being thoughtful about our talent branding strategy. Someone who could take our co op program from we hire co ops to we have a co op program that is a planned full cycle that takes place every year. And think more broadly and long term about our student employee population. So there are a lot of things that we were starting to engage with, ready to start exploring, and needed someone to come on board. So we're still working with a Bowden Group a bit right now, but we did have someone come on board at the beginning of this year. He's fantastic, and he's leading that function internally. And of course, I also dumped on a Workday implementation. So
Wow. So when you say it like that, I mean, it sounds so logical. Yeah. When you get to a point, you really need to make the talent acquisition function specific to your culture and to your process. So it makes a ton of sense when you say it like that.
yeah, I mean, especially internally, talent acquisition is just so much more than acquiring talent.
Yeah.
It is workforce planning. It is helping leaders, be strategic around the resources that they need, not just overall in their organizations, but having foresight to think about, again, your program's advancing, your overall pipeline. What does your organization need to look like today and tomorrow? And how are we going to attract the right people? So it's a lot.
Yeah. You know, obviously in your position, you're overseeing that talent acquisition strategy at a high level, but you've brought in somebody to really hone in on TA itself. But you started in TA and then you've worked your way through HR business partner and now head of people. And so what I've found is that um, typically there's two types of individuals in TA, and not to oversimplify things, but there's people who only want to do TA. They want to have nothing to do with HR and in people operations. And then there's the people like yourself who got started in TA and then they want to take on more into the HR side of things and people side of things. I'm kind of curious to hear your journey and why you've kind of geared yourself towards the people side of things, which obviously is inclusive of talent acquisition, but
Yeah.
kind of curious on that journey.
Well, look, agency recruiting is a whole other ballgame, and it was very much not for me. It is very much for some people.
Yeah.
But you look, I did it for a few years, towards the end of those, and this is before the RPO even, but I just felt like this is not something that I feel like I'm going to be wildly successful at. When I went on site with Tesaro in the RPO, interestingly, the only other HR infrastructure that existed was the head of HR. So I was in a fortunate position to see the HR team growing, and there were 2 business partners that were hired while I was there. And, I kind of fumbled around with them for a little while, trying to understand what their role was, how I interacted with them, where the boundaries were. But what I did find was that their work really interested me. And I think even before they came on board, I was almost accidentally business partnering, frankly, because I was the only one there in some situations. And I didn't necessarily know what I was talking about. But engaging in that partnership is really what opened me up to being interested in the business partnering side of it. So I moved on from there, went to, as you know, Foundation Medicine and started in the recruiting capacity, but got an amazing experience, an opportunity to move into a business partnering function there. And that really took off. And I've kind of never looked back, but I will say the path from talent acquisition to head of HR is a little bit of a unique one, but I'm very appreciative of it because it is an integral and critical part of your talent strategy. And I think a lot of people who have not had that background struggle with that relationship with talent acquisition. And a business partner who doesn't come up through that or doesn't have an appreciation for it, at least, they can be just as much the culprits of straining that relationship. So it really, it's got to work. It's got to work. So I think I've been fortunate to see the benefit and had some amazing partnerships with TA. I mean, many of whom are shared contacts from Foundation Medicine that you and I have.
Yeah. Well, Liz, I mean, it's been awesome to kind of hear about your experiences, to hear about your journey, to hear about your pathway, to hear about really your expert opinions and perspectives on the current market and on company growth and talent acquisition in general. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so appreciative of you having me, and success, because we didn't hear Finding Nemo in the background.
That's right. We didn't. I know there's a little one back there. So awesome. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talent Therapy Podcast with Chris Tamburini. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is copywritten by Rana & Vance, LLC.